Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Actually, I was looking forward to the graphs. That's where I get my best material. Thank you all. It's a pleasure and honor to be invited and speak in front of you. And as someone who sort of made their name in reference, I always feel a little intimidated coming before catalogers. It's kind of that feeling of taking the high school test in your underwear. But I'll do my best. And as you have already guessed, and I hope you've guessed and haven't prepared 300 questions about it, the death of the document may be slightly overstating it. We'll just call it the morbid injury of the document as we move forward. I also will point out that the copy of these slides and hopefully the screencast that has the slides and my lovely blah, blah, blah on top of it will be available on my website, and PCC folks may do with it as they please. Burn in effigy, I don't know. So, Albert Einstein goes to a party. Albert Einstein. And he lives in a sort of blue-collar neighborhood, and as is the tradition of the time, the host of this party is very proud to bring this special guest to him, and he takes him from group to group in introducing him. And so the host takes Albert Einstein to the first guest, and the first guest says, "So, Al, what do you do?" And Al says, "Well, I sort of, what I do is I figured out how time works." And the guy says, "Wow, we're in the same business. I sell watches." So the host sort of scoops Albert away, quickly takes him to the second guest, and "So Al, what do you do?" And Albert Einstein says, "Well, what I've done is I figured out how the stars and the moon and the planets all move and rotate about the heavens." To which the guy says, "Wow, I can't believe it. We're in the same business. I build telescopes." Okay. So he takes quickly takes him to the third host. "Al, what do you do?" And Albert, being a little discouraged and looking for a way to figure this out, says, "Well, what I do is I figured out that electricity and light and magnetism are all the same fundamental force." To which the guy says, "Wow, we're in the same business. I fix TVs." So finally, the host is sort of given up and sort of throws him in the corner with this other guest who starts having the conversation back and forth and says, "Al, what do you do?" And Albert Einstein, just being discouraged at this point, realizing that his message doesn't come through, he goes, "You know what? I don't do anything." He says, I don't sell anything. I don't build anything. I don't fix anything. Frankly, I'm useless." To which the guy says, "Wow, I'm a tenured professor too." So take that for what it's worth. What I think we can see from that terrible joke is that, in fact, if you take things like selling watches and building telescopes and repairing televisions, this is not, in fact, exactly the same business that Albert Einstein is in. That there's not necessarily a functional equivalency that's going on, and yet people were able to see, oh, these are the same thing, right? They were able to see the comparison. And what I want to start by talking about a little bit is the dangers of functional equivalencies. The idea of saying, well, this does the same thing as this, therefore they are the same thing. Now, you guys run into this every day when you say, this edition isn't exactly the same as this edition and such. But bear with me. So we can start, I'll start with the easy way to get the title out of the way. This is not functionally equivalent to this. They are not the same things. An electronic book and a book are fundamentally different beasts. And what we find is as we begin to move traditional genres and traditional document types into an electronic world, they move from having a title that it truly constitutes what it is to something that's truly a metaphor. Right? An e-book is an electronic document in the metaphor of a book. An e-journal is really a metaphor based on this thing called a journal article, but they're not the same thing. Now, I'll give you a really silly example of this, but then I'll give you a few obvious ones. What if I gave you a task? And the task is relatively simple. The task says, I want you to pick an animal to run a race and win. Right? It's a pretty silly task. And some of you may say, no problem, I'm going to pick a cheetah, because they're fast. And others of you say, forget it, I'm going to get a dog. Okay, I'm getting a dog on Tuesday, so dogs are on my mind. So I'm going to get myself a dog. Now, the trick is, both of these are interesting and good choices, but actually will have radical different outcomes based on the actual nature of the task. Because if you notice, the task I gave you, run a race and win, is a pretty generic sloppy kind of task, one that we hit every day, but it's something that we deal with all the time. The function is not well defined. And in fact, if you know anything about cheetahs, and I know you do, you'll know that cheetahs actually are very quick, very fast, and that's about it. Meaning they can accelerate blindingly fast, up to 60 miles an hour. Then, if they don't catch the poor animal fleeing out of the way, they've got to go take a very long nap. And so they don't do it that often. Most of the energy is expended in this really massive burst. Dogs, on the other hand, are built for marathons. They go not as fast. They don't get as fast, to speed as fast, but they can go at their top speed for a long time. So if you're running a 50-yard dash, get the cheetah. If you're running a mile, get the dog. Right? Now, the reason I point this out is that we encounter all of these functional equivalencies, and we as human beings do what those partygoers did in the Einstein party. We look for similarities. That's sort of what people do, is they look for patterns, they look for the things they know so they can apply their tool set and their skills. Now, this is often talked about to a hammer, everything is a nail, but it's not quite that complicated. This is how human beings work. We build frames. We build expectations of what's happening. In fact, this is really how humor works. There's a great article in the New York Times about 3 weeks talking about why no one can ever remember a good joke. Because the way a good joke works is exactly how your brain doesn't. A good joke works by setting a pattern, introduces the first guest, introduces the second guest, introduces the third guest, and then breaks the pattern in an unexpected way at the end. Oh, professor, that's funny. But it still makes sense. Your brain still goes, oh, that's not crazy, but it makes sense, right? Now, that's very different than how my 6-year-old tells a joke, right? Why the chicken crossed the road? Because fart, smelly butt, right? It's funny in its own way, but it's not quite what you joke, right? But your brain's set up going, expect a pattern, expect a pattern, expect a pattern, expect a pattern. And a joke breaks it at the end, and so your memory's sitting there going, oh, I got to remember this. It's going to be funny. What did he say? And suddenly the memory's broken. Right? That's the idea that goes into this, is we have to look for functional equivalence. We look for these metaphors so we can apply these tasks. Well, by the way, there's my dog graph. Now let me give you a little less ludicrous examples. My point of this is that functional equivalencies are dangerous without understanding fundamentally what's going on. And the most obvious way to demonstrate this is actually over time, because over time, someone wants to define time as one damn thing after another. This is the idea, is that over time, the task definitions you come up with will show their weaknesses. So let's do a really simple time machine thing. Let's go back to August of 2004, and I'm going to show you Wikipedia at the top, and that's Encarta at the bottom. Now, the reason it's not necessarily as pretty is this is off the Wayback Machine, so not everything carried over. But what's interesting is one could, in 2004 especially, define these as functionally equivalent sites. They're both encyclopedia sites. They both seek to, in a topical way, explain topics. Right? Now, this may seem like an unfair challenge, but put yourself back in 2004. 2004, what you really had was a Microsoft-supported product with huge buckets of money behind it, a ton of advertising, expertise, and an established base, particularly in the K-12 world, of people using their CD-ROM product. Clearly, this was not going to be a fair challenge to a bunch of people on the web who just like wikis, right? But what we see is if we look at those functional assumptions over time, something very interesting happens. To the point where Encarta, I think it's October, is officially shutting off its site. They stopped updating it and it's going away. Right? So which side of this graph would you like to be on? Now in 2009, all being brilliant, we can look back and throw all our 2.0-ness on ourselves, look back, oh, it's like so clear, it's radical openness, and like people can add content to it, and it's just so internet, and like Encarta, please, right? But that's the idea, is that functional definitions don't work that well, right? Because there's sort of, this is how we grasp at time. Now, let me do another one. This one's slightly more obscure. I think the police are coming to tell me they like it. This time we're going to compare MySpace at the top, which, believe it or not, existed in 2004, and GeoCities at the bottom, Yahoo. Once again, small upstart, weird business model, don't know how they're making money, versus a company that's also sort of past the upstart but weird and not sure how they're making money. Both of these are functionally equivalent sites. They both sought to create your presence on the web. Now, it turns out, once again, in retrospect, that something interesting happened, so we'll just roll this through time. And GeoCities is now gone. And by the way, you want to throw MySpace, we could throw Facebook up there recently and look at those statistics, and you'd also see it different. Now, what's going on? Some of this is marketing and first mover status and adoption, sure. But they're not functionally equivalent. When you really bear down on it, when you say things like they both provide a personal presence on the web, that's not a good functional definition. It's not enough. Yahoo, GeoCities walked you through a rather stringent, step-by-step, pick my features, restriction kind of way. MySpace said if you want your site to look ugly, feel free. Right? If you really need a background with blue and red bouncing at me, enjoy. Right? And it really was much more free form and open. It turns out that's what attracted people. Now, I would argue that both of these come from the same common trend, which is people seeking participation in systems. But that's another 12-hour lecture, and we don't need to go there. So, gee, Dave, this is great. That's not about a document. Leave me alone. One more, just for my sake. We're all dealing with this one. Right? The Google search box is functionally equivalent to the single search box on our site. Right? They walk in and they say, congratulations, you built a beautiful catalog, you've done your MARC record, you've done brilliant work. How does it all work with one search box? Right? Can you make it work with the word stuff? Right? Why aren't I getting the right stuff when I type in stuff? They're not functionally equivalent. And I would argue, by the way, they never will be functionally equivalent. And I'll explain why now. You could say, well, they both work on a bunch of different documents, right? Well, sort of, except that the first thing we notice is the difference is that the single search box, by the way, that's, if you don't know what that box is, that's Tompkins County Community College's OPAC website. They're not functionally equivalent because they do work on a variety of documents, but actually, while Google will tell you they deal with very dirty data, the truth is they deal with web pages. One of the major limiting factors that Google deals with is that its world, its topology, is based on web pages. They've made a horrible attempt to get beyond that, as we all lived through the open WorldCat world. Remember when OCLC did us all a favor and handed all of WorldCat over to Google, and everyone quickly ran to Google to find out if your stuff was in there and you couldn't find it? Because what did it do? Google said, oh, it's a web page with about that much text on it, no one linking to it, and no other authority connections. It's a bad web page. That's what their algorithm did. Right? It makes sense that they aren't the same thing, because the other thing that Google looks for is it looks for a topology. It looks at the idea that these things are connected. Page rank. This page is linked to this page, is linked to this page, is linked to this page. And while Google has that on the web, it has a map, it has a connection, it has popularity data and pointedness to it and use data, over on the other side, we don't. Right? We have some connection data done through classification, done through subject indexing, but frankly it's relatively anemic and it's very homogeneous. It's not dirty data, and in some cases Google works much better on dirty data than it does on nice clean connections back and forth. Well, what this means is the major difference, while we say functionally equivalent because they both have a single search box, Google is in the discovery business and catalogs are in the inventory business. Now, this is where I may not make too many friends in the room, but catalogs, library catalogs, I go back far enough to call them OPACs, and I go far enough back to call them card catalogs back then, are inventory systems. They are not built for discovery. They are built for us. That's why study after study after study of retrieval effectiveness shows that when you guys work a catalog, you guys work a catalog. Right? I mean, you guys get amazing precision, amazing relevance, and when a user works a catalog, it falls flat. Because you're working in a much different level. Am I the only one that actually sees the irony of the Google search box and goes back to the days of the dialogue search box? Right? If you add quotes and pluses and minuses and tildes, isn't that the same damn thing as ands and ors and nears and ins and all that kind of stuff, right? So actually, we can thank Google for revising the 1960s user interface. But this is also why, and I don't know if it's fair to ask it again. How many people go to Amazon? You see, you guys don't, right? How many people go to Amazon to find a book and then go to the catalog to see if you got it? Yeah, I'm the first to admit it. Yes, I will admit, thank you. Because Amazon also is one of those things that is built for discovery. Now, it's very interesting if we were to take a look at that. Let me show you a little bit why. And let me also talk about how we might move closer to that vaulted search box. If I were to look up a resource, let's say Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, because, hey, we all do it. This is what the record looks like in Open WorldCat. You can read it at your leisure. But the point is, that's by the way, the entire screen amount of information proportional to that size, right? So I'm not like just getting the top page. Same record on the Onondaga County Public Library. By the way, this is I always love when I'm talking to a library crowd because I can ask this question. Everyone, you can sort of see that little box with all the lines in the middle of the OCPL. Anyone know what that is? Holdings, right. That's why it's bigger than a WorldCat, right? Because WorldCat at this point didn't put search in your library. That feature isn't turned on here, right? Here's the National Library of Australia, Library of Congress. Now what's interesting is I give this presentation sometimes to folks designing websites, and I start the preface this way. How many people have you been in the website sucks committee? It's never called that, but that's what it is, because it always starts with someone who says, our website like sucks. And you say, well, why? I'm sorry, I'm using my genteel language in such a beautiful room, but you're stuck with me. So, it's like, well, why? I don't like the color blue, and like it's got an ugly picture on it, and the catalog, and it's got to be simpler, it's got to be easier, it's got to be more like Google, more like Amazon. No one scrolls past the second screen. Amazon. Same book, same information, Amazon. Oh, it's all marketing information, right? Well, let's take a look, shall we? That itty bitty little blue line at the top is the general navigation bar. That's where you can do the search box. That's where it says Amazon. That's where you can pick all this other stuff. We'll get to back to that in a second. The next stuff is sales information, but really it's bibliographic information. Yes, it's the cost, but it's also the publisher, and it's got some ISBN, not completely, but we'll get there in a second. Then we get some recommendations based on sales. Then we get quality reviews, the book review. Then we get more bibliographic data, which is the hardcore stuff. And by the way, if you add that sort of orangish bar with that dark blue, or that light blue, you're not off too far from the rest of it. So what else is going on here? Recommenders, open reviews, people talking about it. Pathfinders. Remember the glory days of Pathfinders, right? Discussion tools, wikis and such. And then at the bottom, some more marketing tales. By the way, if this were a more academic book, you would also have citation data popping up in there, which I think is interesting. Now, what's interesting about this is this explains to some degree why this is a better discovery tool. From just a brute force mode, you look at this and you go, there's more text to work with. And not only that, there's more user-generated text to work with. So there's a lot more slop that's allowed between the user, but actually inhibits some precision that you guys might be looking for. Absolutely. But the other side that goes on is Amazon and the libraries, both of these suffer from the same problem. It's just that the Amazon is willing to show it to the world and call it a feature. And that is an obsession with artifacts and items. The idea of an item-based catalog. Because here's the trick. Amazon wants to sell you that book, right? And we like to think that we're trying to find that book. But what's really going on here, if you break up those open reviews, what happens is Amazon funnels all this discussion, all the context, all the use around an item into that item. Yeah, so I did a quick little study. You're welcome to do it in your pastime. I took the top 10 selling books. This is about almost a year ago now. I took the top selling books and I analyzed the comments. And I did a simple thing. I said either this is talking about some wacky thing, this is talking about another book, this is talking about the book itself. All right? And then the last chart is the total number of comments. Now what's interesting, Hot, Flat, and Crowded, which was a book that was followed up to The Earth is Flat, you can see that actually the vast majority of it is about the book. But when you get into New Moon, Breaking Dawn, Eclipse, and Twilight, which are all part of a series, look at that green level. Most of the people commenting and looking at this book aren't actually talking about that book. What they're talking about, I'll give you the Harry Potter example. They're looking at Sorcerer's Stone and they're saying, boy, this is J.K. Rowling's a genius author. What she talks about in book 1, you don't even understand the importance of until book 6. Now, are they talking about book 1 or are they talking about book 6? Oh, well, they're talking about the series. Well, sometimes not. Well, you did in the movie, they did a horrible job translating, right? So there's all this discussion, but what Amazon does is it says, oh, it's all about this silly book, and they throw it in there. But it's not. And in fact, this kind of text, if Amazon was smart and made it computationally useful, they could actually lead you from one material to another. I did this example with parenting. Right? So if you look at sleep habits of infants, a very important topic to parents. Right? And there's this great book, there's sort of these two sides of the book, of the world, which is one, let them cry. They got to tough it out. The world sucks. Let them get used to it early, right? Which is the way I did it. There's the coddle them and bring them into your bed, and by the time they're 30, they'll be ready to leave, right? And so what's interesting is at one point in the comments, the sales recommendation said, if you like this book, you'll like this book. And what was it? It was the let it cry, and coddle them. He's like, no, if you like this book, you'll hate this book, right? But because people were looking at them together, and because Amazon was stupid, it didn't have any structured data to work with that was between objects and not simply within the object, they couldn't make the distinction. Now, before you knowingly nod at me like, ha, 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 we librarians figured that out a long time ago, ask me where the between the item cataloging information is that libraries keep. And we move on. Now, this false functional equivalency, by the way, we can apply this not only to features, we can apply this to entire domains. For example, right now we're all living through this interesting functional equivalency discussion that's going on between reporting, journalism, and newspapers. Right? When newspapers go out of business, journalism dies. The journalists working for newspapers say, we are the newspaper. Well, if you ask people on CNN, and you can decide whether you like CNN or Fox News or pick your example, or you look at the local news or the world news, they might make an argument about whether journalism is dying versus a medium of it. But I've talked to people in the industry, and they look at this and they say the reporters have become so identified with the paper going out that they forgot that they're reporters. And if you look at what people look for on the internet right after porn, news, well, at least makes the top 10. Porn, Britney Spears, porn. News. And the idea is, this is a hot topic. It's breaking apart. What's dying is a business model. Not a quest or a need for this, but a business model. And once again, you think you know where this is going, so I'll just take you there. In the library world, we're really good at this, right? We're practically paranoid about this. We don't just have one person out to get us. We got lots of people out to get us, right? So we say, aha, we've got our databases and find research materials and such. Oh, no, we are fighting Google on that, right? Or, oh, we've got, our collections and our resources. Oh, no, we're fighting Amazon on that. Or we've got our reference, at least reference is magically ours. Oh, no, we're going against Yahoo Answers. These are all false functional equivalents. But if you have not read, look for any book you want on the future of libraries and look at them do this, right? It's all there. It's libraries have the following functions. We collect materials, we organize material, we disseminate materials, right? And they functionally define libraries, and then they proceed to take each one of the functions and show potential competitors. Missing completely that they're doing a really interesting, missing the underlying worldview going on. And you see things like, well, let's see. Google isn't really doing the same thing as libraries with the articles and databases. They're really doing the same thing as Yellow Pages, right? Everyone, Bing, right? Let's say it right. Bing, right, is a wonderful thing, right? I love Bing because what has happened is Bing has been one of the first moves that within a week, Google market share disappeared. It went over to Bing. And how did it happen? It happened by a brand new, magnificent service that's never been seen on the earth before. It was a rebranding of the existing service by Microsoft, a bunch of advertisements, and a push out to the default Windows 7 install, right, that changed the default search engine on the browsers, and it took away market share. But what became interesting is suddenly you were bringing up Google results, and then you started bringing up Bing results, and they weren't the same thing. And in fact, a lot of small businesses suddenly saw their traffic die, and you have to wonder, well, what exactly was it that's different between these two things? And the answer was their ad models. All these businesses had spent a lot of money buying placement and keyword in Google, and suddenly Bing, people were using Bing and it wasn't there, and so it becomes an interesting question. So the notion of what's behind Google becomes important, and over time, it becomes amazingly important, right? Amazon's not in the book business. Amazon is explicitly stated they're in the Walmart business. How many bookstores can you go in that you can buy a garden rake? Right? You can do that on Amazon. Right? Amazon sells books and they sell lots of other stuff as well. And Yahoo Answers, also in the advertising business. Right? How to get sticky. Right? So while functional equivalency may be there, and you're welcome to argue, David, if our users can't tell the difference between the functions, if our users do this, what does it matter? And the answer is, over time, durability, and us selecting our service and best serving those users, it matters a lot. By the way, we are not immune from this. This, to me, is the most obvious example of defining librarianship functionally I've ever seen in my life. This is a laundry list of thou shalts. Thou shalt know this, thou shalt know that, thou shalt know this, thou shalt know that. And nowhere behind it is the answer to what I consider the most important question, why? Not by the way, that there aren't good answers to that, but it doesn't say it. There's nothing in there that ties together. So for example, competency 1C. All graduates of library schools shall know the history of libraries and librarianship. Okay, let's take a look at that. If we just talk functionally equivalent, you all have probably heard the following history lesson. Libraries began, let's just pick it in the Library of the Library of Alexandria. Right? The joke, of course, is if we're not the second oldest profession, we probably helped the first oldest profession organize their records. Right? So the Library of Alexandria existed. It was a big collection. All the documents were the world. The best story, well, second best story about the Library of Alexandria is it was a major shipping port. So any ships that sailed into the Bay of Alexandria, they would send troops down to collect all their documents, copy the documents, and hand the copies back to the ship. More brilliant than I can think about. But then, and this depends on whether you're anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, or anti-Christian. Someone came in and burned it all down. And then life got horrible, but luckily we had a few monks hanging out in Europe that decided to copy manuscript after manuscript and created dissemination, saved information. And we moved forward a couple of centuries, and then Benjamin Franklin hangs out in Philadelphia, notices he's got a bunch of books, notices his friends has a bunch of books, says, hey, let's get together and put on a show, and libraries exist. Right? So now you've all fulfilled 1C. But let me give you a slightly different version of that talks about the functional definitions, this view of world. The Library of Alexandria is an interesting place because it's not actually a place. It's a campus. And the first building on the campus of the Library of Alexandria in ancient times was not the library. It was a building dedicated to creativity and the muses, and they called it the musée, and it's where we get the term museum. And what did they put in the musée? Documents. The library, which they built later, was actually one of the first economic development projects where they brought scholars from around the known world, paid them to exist in this place full of colonnades and places to walk in a dormitory where they would interact on a regular time at meals. And what they would do in the library is they would talk and think, and if they wrote it down to a scroll would get rolled up and they'd put it in the musée. So in fact, the Library of Alexandria wasn't necessarily the thing we think of as the place where the books and the scrolls were. It was actually the place where the thinking and the writing of those occurred, and it got moved into artifacts in the musée. Now, I'm going to flash forward, but I'm not going to look at Europe. In fact, I'm going to look at what happened in Europe was a bunch of noblemen started picking on each other, and the Pope got really ticked off, and they needed to give them something to do with their armies, and said, go free Muslim Spain. Right? And so suddenly all the noblemen went on their first crusade to free Muslim Spain, which, by the way, was interesting because most of them were hired as Muslims to go do it. And so since they were all intermarried, they said, can I have Toledo? Sure, here it is. They walk into Toledo in Spain, and what do they find? Library after library after library. This one library had more volumes in it than all of France at the time, and that was one of 80. And what were they doing in these libraries? Copying them down? No, they were using them. They were developing these little things we call algebra and zero. And these concepts were, in fact, a lot of the documents that came from the Library of Alexandria were translated into Arabic and kept in these and used for architecture and used for Spain. So while the illiterate priests were copying things they could barely read, the Muslims in Toledo were busy building aqueducts and buildings. Now I'm going to flash forward here, and I'm going to go to Philadelphia, but many people don't know that, in fact, Benjamin Franklin didn't build the first public library. He built a subscription library where you had to pay to get at it. The first public library in Philadelphia was built by a guy, and I swear this is his name, Dr. Pepper. And Dr. Pepper was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and he said we need to build a library that's open and good for all for the good and social good of our people and our citizenry. Very much the ethic that was picked up by Carnegie as he built Carnegie libraries. Now, my point with these two histories and the functional equivalency, again, is that it's moving the idea from collection to scholarship. The concept of library from a collection to the concept of library is a scholarship, and it's an ancient concept. Moving from the idea of dissemination and replication to action. That information is not preserved if it is simply copied, it is preserved if it is put into use, and the notion of sharing to sharing as a public good. In essence, what the idea is to think of knowledge not as a thing, but knowledge as an action. Now this becomes very important because when we look at a couple of the other false equivalencies in documents and e-whatevers, you have to look at things like e-journals. Are they the same as journals? Look at your interlibrary loan statistic and you will quickly see they are nothing like journals. The number of people requesting journals, journal articles, going like crazy. The idea of a journal as a comprehensive thing that people are looking for has disappeared with the advent of the full-text databases. Right? As a scholar, we look for a specific article. We don't look for a specific issue. That only helps us find the article to request it, to get it in, to get it full text. 10 terabyte data sets. Are they really the same as a document? If you create a collection level record for 10 terabyte data sets of astronomical data, does it count? Right? Can you figure out how to use it? Non-document knowledge sources, things that don't even look like documents. Facebook, Twitter, Google, gigapixel images. Gigapixel images, we all know what a megapixel is, and we're up to 10 if we've got our regular point shoot. Imagine another order of magnitude on top of that. The idea is that you could stand in Wrigley Stadium, take a picture during the Cubs game, and be able to zoom in on every person's face in the crowd. Oh, that's a picture of Wrigley Stadium. Is it? Or is it, how is it used? Right? We'll get to that in a second. The point of this is just looking and thinking we can do the same old thing with these new things is not going to work. I'll give you one example why. I was working on a National Academy's panel looking at transportation information, which, you know, there's only so much information you can really understand about asphalt before you say, I get it. But so we sort of started the standard way. We've got all these libraries and Department of Transportation libraries in the states. Within the counties, we have highway agencies. We have university collections. We have federal collections. We have international collections. How can we all get together, right? This is a discussion that everyone's lived through on some consortium ever, right? The joke is, what do you call two librarians at a bar? Consortium. So the idea was, we sort of said, oh, well, we'll get a WorldCat, we'll get our shared records, we'll build a union catalog, Trist, etc. And suddenly we realized, you know, wait, there's something else we're missing here. Soon, every mile of road will generate a gigabyte of data a day. Okay? Now, Well, the deal is that very rarely do you go out these days and build a road by putting down blacktop and walking away. First of all, before you even are allowed to put the blacktop down, you've done amazing environmental impact studies, you've done watershed studies, you've done GIS allocations, you've done population control, you've done fish and wild. You're nodding. You must work in around this area? All right. Or you just love this stuff as a hobby. Yeah, anyway, you know, they had to worry about eagle sightings, right? Because you don't want to build a road where an eagle likes to hang out because they're an endangered species. And here's the other thing. I live in Syracuse, New York. And we know a thing or two about snow, but that also means we know a thing or two about salt. And so we are, in fact, literally the salt city. And in fact, that means that if you put enough chemicals down on a road, things don't like it and tend to die, right? And so what they've tried to do is instead of just salting everything, they now actually embed temperature sensors with little RFID tags in them. So that when it says, hey, I'm frozen, come salt me, you don't have to salt everything, just where those little sensors tell you to go to do it. Now, the other one is toll data. I don't know, once again, if you can drive from Maine, I think you make it all the way to Florida with an Easy Pass system, which is a RFID toll system. You just drive through it and senses it. I'm full of really bad stories, so here's my next bad story. A guy told me about his grandmother passed away, and it was really sad, and it was in Buffalo. And so they were sort of putting her affairs in order, and the thing you're supposed to do is take the the toll RFID sensor, pack it away, and ship it back to Albany. And it got charged the post office truck from every stop all the way back to Albany. So, and actually the other thing is the unintended consequence. The toll data has become the first most request for that data is how to get their money out of it. The second is by divorce lawyers. I want to know who was where, when. So, interesting things. Car black boxes, how fast did you go? All this is generating data, right? You don't think about this, but it's generating data on a regular basis. And now, I've got my iPhone. If you guys, yes, I'm one of those iPhone people. But, when I get stuck in traffic, the first thing I do is pop this thing up to see what's a red roadway and how far does it have to go. And I can look at the traffic and I can look at the weather at the same time. And all this data is being accumulated in real time. It's assumed that this will become a gigabyte an hour. As there are 3.5 million miles of just highways in the US, that would be 3.3 petabytes of data an hour, or 28 exabytes of data a year. What's an exabyte? I'm glad you asked. A byte, one single character. Lonely single character. A kilobyte, 2 kilobytes is a typewritten page. A megabyte, 2 megabytes, a high-resolution photograph. A gigabyte is about 20 meters of shelved books digitized. This is from Berkeley Group. Terabyte, 2 terabytes is an academic research library, just the text of them. We won't actually take the bad pictures of the page. A petabyte then is all US academic research libraries, and an exabyte then goes to all words ever spoken by humans, which I think includes ugh, pterodactyl, right? And by the way, in case you really can't, want to impress your friends, the next one is zettabyte, and then we go to, and I'm not making this up, yottabytes. Big data, have we? Yes. So when we have all of this stuff, and you look at the idea of a 5 exabytes data set about your roads that don't move, you ask yourself, is that really a document? When you look at Twitter feeds, and you look at Twitters, and you look at that, 164 characters? It's always like 2 characters too short, but if you look at Twitter feeds, do you really want to mark record for a Twitter feed? But they disappear. And what in the heck are you going to put for a good, nice collection level record of Facebook? Right? Now, we've always sort of said, well, that's fine. Over there, we deal with document-like objects. So what options do we have with dealing with these non-document-like objects? Well, the first one, and I think really the one that we would probably glom onto first, is to simply ignore it. Right? So just say, no, that's delightful, that's scientific data, that's their problem. Or, oh, exabytes of traffic data, we'll let the traffic people deal with that. Or simply Google will eventually figure this out, let's just not pay attention. Right? Well, there's a couple of downsides to the ignore it, right? The first is the commercialization of data stewardship. How comfortable do we really feel with Google's do no evil when China can say, we'd really like to know who those bloggers were, and Google says, well, I guess so. Right? How comfortable do we really feel with all the personal information being put in the cloud when the cloud is being run by for-profit organizations that make resale? Here's one. In the reference world, there's a lot of discussion about using instant messaging to do reference work. It's free, it's cheap, it's easy, everyone's got it. What's the problem? Hello? Right? Well, there's something about free IM that you should know. And it's usually in those wonderful things you agree to when you go, click, whatever, just let me go. And one of them is, we get all that data. Is AOL really giving us AIM out of the love of their heart, or are they data mining that on a regular basis to look for trends and what you want, what you need, and what your advertising looks like, and all this other stuff? So you got that. The other is the dissolution of the library as an institution. That's a little small one. The continued reduction to a niche player, which is it's really quaint and cute that you're dealing with these document things. We've got all this stuff that we're dealing with on a regular basis. Oh my, let's move on. And you've all faced that at some point. You faced it because people overextend that, right? They say, oh, your libraries, you're really good at Danielle Steele books, right? You say, well, we do something more than that. Right? We are an information organization and we figure all this stuff out. But if you keep going and say we only do information organization on this little thing, an increasingly smaller thing, we got a problem. So what's our next option? We can simply limit the library. This is the solution by definition. right? Selection versus intellectual freedom. If you say the library is not in the world of this large information expanse, thank you very much. We just deal with document-like objects because that's important enough, right? It runs into a problem. One of the major problems it runs into is that we have two very interesting values that are completely diametrically opposed that we hold now. Now, we don't like to admit it, but librarians in our statement and Bill of Rights and philosophy and our principles have two opposing statements. One is the value of librarians is selection, that we curate, we look at, we find the good stuff, we enhance, we enrich. The other is we provide full, open, and free access. Now, we've never had to deal with the fact that they oppose because we've never had limitless amounts of money, right? We've always sort of said, we're really going for the second one, but until we have all the money in the world, we're going to stick with the first one, right? The problem is, what happens when, as we are now, I think a gigabyte of data is about 30 cents and dropping? What happens when you can keep it all? For those of you in an academic library, what happens when every one of your faculty members and every one of your students on a regular basis every day backs up to a central server that never goes away? What is your role as the library in doing that? Because, by the way, if you look at the idea of preservation and archiving and you leave it in the hands of morons like me, you're in real problems. I got a new laptop. It's so cool. Really, what happened to your former documents? No idea. I handed it to my son. He's 5. He'll figure it out, right? They're gone. Right? But what happens if it automatically shows up at your doorstep? What are you going to do with it? Throw it away? Keep it? Catalog it? What are you going to put at it? You can't play the game of, well, we're going to keep everything, but we don't have unlimited resources. Well, what happens when your resources far expand your human resources to deal with it? All right? So what's our other options? We can catalog it all. Tried it. Didn't work. Any of you remember Cork? Collaborative online resource something or other? Cataloging, maybe? Right? Remember this one. This was where you were going to do Dublin core records of every website out there, and they were going to automatically turn into MARC for you, and that was really pleasant until you realized that the minute you got done with the website, they went and changed it. Right? I did the statistics on this, and if you want to, in fact, do 1 trillion websites, if we get everyone at ALA to do it, we can do it in 3 years. We can't sleep, we can't go to the bathroom, and we can't attend a committee meeting, but we can catalog every resource. The problem is we would have to start actually over before we even finished to do it all. Right? It's dynamic, it changes. So what do we have to do? We have to embrace it. We have to understand that we live in a different, messier world, that an ebook is not a book. And one of the fundamental differences is not its form and its page numbers, but the fact that it's a network document, and it's a document that's collected and put in use, and we embed the use right in the document. And the way we have to do is, the first thing we have to do is we have to toss out this phrase. This is a bad phrase. This is a horrible phrase, and it's an oxymoronic phrase, right? Recorded knowledge is right up there with intelligent rock. There's a rock. Now, you look at this rock. This rock is actually, it's a real rock. It's actually in front of Taliesin West out in Scottsdale, Arizona. It was where Frank Lloyd Wright went, for the other 6 months of the year. And they found it on the property and they brought it out. Now, if you look at that rock, I see it as a rock. But if you're a geologist, you can see that, you can learn a lot from that rock. You can find out when it was made, how old it is, you can find out what kind of rock, what it's gone through. If you're an archaeologist, you look at that rock and you see those scratchings in there and you realize that those are actually Native American hieroglyphs. And they're ideograms and they have context and they have meaning. My point of all of that is all that information is not resident in the rock. It is resident in the person who looks at the rock, who analyzes the rock. We are not in the game of recorded knowledge. We are in the game of knowledge. And it's probably useful for us to talk about a little bit about what do I mean by knowledge. And here's my definition. Knowledge is an inherent human activity, right? It's about use and it's about the sense we make of things. And what we're going to do is I'm going to just quickly walk you through this graph. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a guy named Bob. That's Bob. All right? So Bob has a question, as noted by the big hole in Bob's head. Bob has something he needs to know. Right? Now, where did that knowledge of that gap, by the way, the reason I call him Bob is actually after Bob Taylor, who wrote still my favorite article ever in 1968 called Question Negotiation. And what Taylor said is you've got all these sort of unstated needs and stated needs and all this other stuff, but it's a question, it's a gap. Right? Where does it come from? Well, either it comes from some internal source, some intrinsic motivation. Things like, I need to know to save money. I need to know just because I can't go to sleep without it. I need to know for some reason. Or some external motivation, some external source. You need to know this because you won't get an A on your paper. You won't get through the next 10 days. You won't get your, etc. Right? So this sort of gap comes from some motivation where you realize you have a missing chunk. It also comes from what you already know. That's what those little dots are, we'll get to in a second, on the left are. Right? What you already know, you've hit a circumstance, you don't know what to do with it before. Right? This is, we bring our functional equivalency, oh, this is like, and we find out it's not. And so now we need to figure it out. So what we're going to do is we're going to explore a domain, that's our y-axis, over time. And over time, we're going to change how we know the world. We are literally going to change our worldview. Right? And how are we going to do that? Well, what we're going to do is engage in a series of conversations. Now, those conversations may be with librarians, maybe with professors, and maybe with colleagues. The vast majority of conversations we're going to engage with are with ourselves. When you read a book, you are not having a conversation with the author. If you read a book and you say, gee, Hamlet, that was a stupid thing to do, Bill Shakespeare doesn't sit there and go, you know, you're right. Right? He's dead. I didn't want to lay that on a few people. You're having a conversation with, if you literally just sat there and said, this guy's an idiot. Who were you talking to? Right? If you woke up this morning and said, does this make me look fat? Who were you talking to? Right? This is the idea of an internal conversation. You're talking literally to yourself. And what you're doing by having these conversations with others, with individuals, is you're seeking an agreement. Right? This is what I think it means. Yeah, that's what I think it means. All right, let's agree that that's what it means. And by the way, a really important type of agreement is not to agree. Right? No, I don't agree with what you said. Let's just agree to disagree. Right? So we seek agreements. Now, what do those agreements look like? That's the sort of purple dot flashing at you in 3D. Well, first of all, it's got the concept of the agreement. The agreement can be things like 2 + 2 = 4, it's hot outside, Fox News doesn't tell the truth, whatever you want. Right? And it probably has associated with some artifact and some conversant, the person you're talking with it. But you'll see those start to fade because there's this great thing called source amnesia that we all live through. Right? That's when you know something, but you don't know where you know it from, and eventually you tell the story like it's your own. My wife's bean salad, right? My wife's bean salad that she's the one who brings to every picnic, well, that's because she went to a picnic and she got the recipe for it, and then she forgot where she got the recipe, and she brought it to enough picnics that it was Anna's bean salad, and then someone's going to take the bean salad, right? This idea that we forget where we get it. Right? This is another reason, by the way, in psychology terms, why lies and gossip are so insidious, is if you tell the same thing over and over again, even when you say it to refute it, you actually build up a pattern in the brain. Right? So the fabulous Barack Obama is a Muslim. Right? That was during the election over and over again. The way you refute it is you don't start by saying, Barack Obama is not a Muslim, because what your brain hears is, Barack, keyword, Muslim, yep. You know, right? It just keeps reinforcing something, and eventually you forget the not. And so, in fact, when you watch media-savvy people like the administration, they never actually repeat the accusation. They simply refute it in other terms. Right? But the point is, our brains are fun things. So over time, we're going to come with these series of agreements. But what's important is these agreements are not just these buckets in our brain. They're relationships. Right? So here's a quick example. This is the class participation. I'm going to give you a word. You think about what it means. Ready? Light. Got it? How many people thought not heavy? How many people thought illumination? How many people thought set ablaze? Good. No pyromaniacs in the room. Right? Formula. Formula. Mathematical expression. Chemical expression. Things you give a baby to keep it from starving to death. Grandparent? No? All right. The thing is that these all make sense. It's another one of those jokes, right? You expect. The other one makes sense, but it's not what you expect. These are relationships. We hold them in. When we look at documents, this is a page out of the Gutenberg Bible. Some people look at this and they think origin of printing. Some people think of this as an artifact to be preserved, and some people think of this as religious truth. This is the Word of God. And some people think all of the above, simultaneously. And in fact, our real problems are when we hold two of these and they seem to be in conflict. But the point of those is nowhere in the document are those perspectives. They are all on the outside brought to it, and in fact, the user defines that context, not the object and not the facilitator. You know this. We've given up the idea of cataloging as somehow exposing truth out of a document. We don't, books aren't written with the knowledge of Dewey in them. We bring Dewey to them, right? Or we bring Library of Congress. You can bring whatever you want to it, but you're bringing it to it, right? And so that means that the user ultimately is in charge of it. Now, if you understand that context, going back to our catalogs as inventory systems, you can rock them. If, on the other hand, you're expecting your world to be in that system, they fail. They fail on a regular basis. So we have to, first of all, think about, why do I bring this up about books? Well, books. What is, when I can search every word on every page of a book, what does that do to my world? And when I can not only search the words in the book, but the annotations of the book, the versions of the book, all of this information, and I'm bringing my world to it, I'm expecting this system to be there, what happens? Those lines that went up with Wikipedia, because people could control the words and the terms in their world, with MySpace, when they could control the context and world, what happens when they hit library systems that say, we're in control? People use them and adopt them readily, or people go to Amazon and understand what an inventory system is suddenly really quickly, right? The other thing we have to think about is the tyranny of the item, right? Item level cataloging, the most expensive stuff we do. So if I take the picture, this picture already comes with a bunch of metadata about it, right? It comes with EXIF data and it all came out of the camera, but we know we can quickly throw a Dublin Core record up on it. And if we really want to get fancy, we could put a MARC record by it. And if we really are, hip and cool, we can do a mods record. And then, of course, you got to have the OAI system. And then if you don't have a tag cloud, I don't even know what that one is. I think it's TAI. And then, a tag cloud, because tag clouds are 2.0. And suddenly we have 10 terabytes of metadata for every 2K of data that we're doing. Right? This concept that, how many people, have you ever heard the phrase metadata? Right? It's the metadata that tells you about the metadata? This is insane. This is recursion. I have metadata. Do you stammer? No, I simply do Dublin Core. Right? We begin to bundle these things. It's like we take, twine and chewing gum and keep adding more and more different exports as long as it speaks RDF or XML or something like that. God knows it'll stick on the wall somewhere. And we just assume that we can add more and more to it. This is nuts. And it comes from the concept, it's inbred. I blame Lego for this. I really do. The Danish are out to get us. How many conferences, how many technical services conferences have you been that talked about standards and they had a picture of a Lego block? Well, this layer clicks into this layer. No, it doesn't. It took some programmer 10 minutes to figure out how to do this. Don't bother me with this, right? This idea that somehow we can take uniform, nice, universally understood concepts, terms, phrases, metadata standards, and buckle them together to make man questing for the heavens is insane. The truth is the world looks like this is South Korean wire. Actually, this is Vietnamese wiring. These are actual pictures on Flickr of what the wiring system looks like throughout most of Vietnam because, it's a new technology. Run a new wire. This is how the world looks. This is how the world is. And the trick is we need to learn how to embrace this, believe it or not, and not constantly trick ourselves into thinking, if I just find the right colored block, it'll fit. No! Run another damn wire. Now, what's happening is we see this in systems, and it doesn't look quite so ugly, but once again, MySpace could look much uglier. We see this in our systems. We've seen a migration of systems from a system view designed to user-based design to user design. What do I mean? Well, system view talks about an expert-driven, right? We go in, we say, we need a computer system to solve this problem. All right? Who do we talk to give us the specs? We talk to Bernie. Who's Bernie? Bernie does this every day for 12 hours a day, eats pizza, sleeps, comes back, does it again. Talk to Bernie. Bernie will tell you how to design the system. Right? The user-based system is when, we need a new system. What are we going to do? Let's have a focus group. Let's bring all our users in and ask them what they want. I had Andrew Dillon, who's the dean at University of Texas Library School, he says user-based design is dead. He says it's a dead concept. He actually said this in Syracuse where we claim our fame as user-based design. And what he said was user-based design has become ask as many users as you can until you find the user that you want to give you the answer, right? Does our website suck? Yes. Does our website suck? Yes. Does our website suck? No, I like it. It's a good website, right? This is user-based design. User design. is user built. You literally throw the user in and they build the system around it. How many people, if you remember back in the days, which can be all of 2 years ago, in library school or beyond, learned the idea of value-added systems, or you may have heard Belkin's system, but it was the idea we have a corpus of documents, we have a retrieval system on that corpus of documents, we have a user, and in between is the interface, or a negotiation space, or a value-added space. And it's the idea is that the user's here, the stuff is here, and we just have to figure out the right system in between. Well, what we're quickly seeing is that user is building the stuff around them. It used to be that you went to the library to get stuff that was created elsewhere and brought together. Now we're talking about people coming to the library to create stuff to send out. That's a very different view. The idea that a systems view is loaded with deep functionality. These things are big, monolithic, let's send them to... I spend way too much time on airplanes, and if you've ever been at the airport and they've tried to get you the ticket thing, have you ever peeked behind the screen and gotten really scared because it's like all 3-letter codes and, you know, voice terminals and such? Loaded with deep functionality. Loaded with deep functionality and user-based design. Loaded with really shallow functionality. If you look at things like MySpace or Facebook, look at what you can do there. I can put up a post, I can put up a picture, I can say yes or no. I mean, it's really simple stuff, but you can combine them any way you want. Right? In a system view, it's modal. You do this, then you do this, then you do this. In a user-based design, it's non-modal. You can bring up an application, bring two together. In a user system, it's completely customizable, targeted to a given set of users, targeted to a small set of users, targeted to anyone who wants to get together and be social. Examples, integrated library systems are frankly system view systems. They're big, they're monolithic, they do a lot, they're deep functionality, require a lot of training to understand all of them. User-based design operating systems are really the idea of trying to figure out ways users operate, and the whole sort of Web 2.0 world is the system view. And by the way, I still think there's places for all of these. I don't want to say they're all replacing. I just think that we need to worry about the things we haven't accommodated before, these user systems. So what do our catalogs need to begin to look like? Well, they need to stop looking like a bunch of item stuff in lists and start looking like a bunch of relationships among them. Right? So the idea is, here's a user and they're going into their class, they're going for electronic reserves, they bring up the syllabus, and that syllabus, they can find the things that are cited within the syllabus. So it's pulling from catalog, it's pulling from our databases. They can put their own stuff in there, their own assignments. But then they can begin to look and they can begin to say, well, who else read this book? And what did they think about this book? And they begin to say, well, gee, this person wasn't even in this class. They're in another class. I never thought about that class. We need to begin to capture what sits between objects, which is the context and the user. That 10 terabyte data set, that 10 terabyte data set was produced by people who know the use of that data set. They know when they're going to apply it and how they're going to apply it. And rather than trying to describe the 10 terabyte data set, we need to start describing when did they use it and how did they use it, and do it on a continuing regular basis. We need to begin to understand why people are looking at things and not simply the things that they're looking at. We need to be part of the conversations about how they're trying to solve a problem and not about the artifacts that are produced out of the conversation. A really crude analogy is that I used to talk about librarians as having a shovel in one hand and a catcher's mitt in the other. And when a researcher would walk into a library, they'd pull out the shovel. And you'd say, I need to know about X, Y, or Z. What do we start doing? Shoveling stuff on them. Oh, you need to read this book. You need to do this. You know, we talk about harassing reference librarians. You know you've gone too far when they're literally chasing the patron out of the door. No, read this one too. No, I found you on Facebook and I've decided to read all this information. We need to begin to capture the in-between. Now you say things like classification, subject cataloging capture in-between, but it captures one conversation. Imagine if I gave you a task and the task was to go into Grand Central Terminal, because as we all know, it's Grand Central Terminal, not Grand Central Station. Over here, personal conversation over here. Business, I want lawyers, well, out of the building. I want doctors over here, engineers, and you begin to break them down to smaller and smaller chunks until you could reasonably walk up to each individual and say, what were you talking about? What were you talking about? What were you talking about? Right? Well, what happens is, right now, think of another model. Right now, as we're sitting in this room, right, they're called radio waves. If you have a cell phone, you can tie into them. If you have a radio, you can listen to them, right? Many of you might be listening to them right now instead of me. I understand that, right? But the thing is, they don't interfere with this conversation. But if you have the right technology, you can sort and find those conversations. You can even co-locate them together. You have friends that are on very different radio waves, you can pull them together. That's the kind of thinking that we need to think about, is that we're not in a physical world anymore. We don't have to put them in a place on a shelf. We can have them in 5,000 different conversations with 5,000 different uses and perspectives. When I think about how the fabulous more like this feature, and I look at Harry Potter and I say, I want more like this. I don't mean more youth fiction. More like this for me is the entire encyclopedia of Star Wars vehicles, Lego World, and How to Draw Dragons, because those are the books I bonded with my 5-year-old son with. Right? That's my classification of them. And I should be able to have that resident in the system, not instead of Dewey and Ellison, but in the system so other people can discover it, use it, and it should begin to look like me. Now, I've gone too long, and so I just want to close up here. But I want to close up here by saying, I gave a speech to Alex, I got to do this right, a couple years ago in D.C. And I gave a speech not completely dissimilar. In fact, I used the whole transportation information thing in them. And I was lucky enough to hear a respondent afterwards. And they said, Dave gave a very impassioned speech, and he sounded like a Baptist preacher. But in truth, he was actually a Jeremiah. Now, it stuck with me because I had no idea what that meant until I went to Wikipedia and looked up Jeremiah. And then I got slightly offended because Jeremiah was, of course, the Old Testament prophet, which I thought was a good thing, that always predicted doom. Not only that, the Israelites got so tired of him predicting doom, they threw him in jail. Until he was proved right, they were overthrown and these other folks let him out. But I don't want to be a Jeremiah. I don't want to say, we have all this massive information and e-journals and it's a whole new world. And good luck. Because I know a lot of you didn't ask to be in that world. I know a lot of you didn't ask to deal with these problems. I know a lot of you, when you got into librarianship, didn't do it so that you could have your world changed on you every 10 seconds. I know a lot of you did not join librarianship because wikis were just coming in. I know a lot of you actually look to the predictability of the world. I know some of you relish in the act of cataloging and deep concentration and love of an object. I know that. But I don't think that stops you from solving the problem today. It's the famous prophet Donald Rumsfeld once said, you don't go to the war that you want, with the army you want, you go with the army you've got. I think you guys can solve this problem. I think we can solve this problem. I look at this world and I say, these are important questions. I don't think that the future is one in which libraries are less important. I really think the future of information organization, of cataloging, of reference, of the library agency is going to be brighter and better in the future than it is today, just because of these things. When you look at that idea of what do we have in place of libraries, we come up with a very short answer. When you look at libraries and you begin to ask the question, what role do they play in society, you come up with really good answers. And what's interesting is we often come up with these answers from people who aren't in libraries. The most doom and gloom I hear about libraries comes from librarians, not from those outside of it. When I worry about solving the problems of archiving information and dealing with exabytes of data and dealing with Twitters and dealing with the idea of for-profit data collections and dealing with the e-journals and systems, and I look at librarians, I feel better. I feel that this is the time. This is the time to be alive. Our golden age was not in the days of slow documents in the 50s that we could spend hours on each record. Our golden days are ahead of us when people realize that we are the bulwarks between ignorance and absence of memory and the preservation of culture. The mission that I'm calling you to, that I think that you can be a part of, that I look at this information and I'm solving this problem, is a larger mission. And it is a noble mission. I don't think we often recognize that we live in a noble field. It's a vocation and a calling more than it is an occupation and a title. It is a mission that says that the mission of librarians is to improve society through facilitating knowledge creation in our communities. Not to collect, not functional, I collect, I catalog, I shelve. That's not our mission. Those are our means, our tools. Our mission is knowledge. Our mission is improvement of the community. Our mission is to look at problems and help the world solve them. And that is a mission that no other group can stand up for, has the credibility to stand up, or the skills to set up. So I know some of you may look at these problems and say, that's not my problem, I'm on the ignore it option, thank you very much, but you can't be. It is something that we must take on, we will take on, and libraries will be better for taking that on. We must serve, we must innovate, and we must lead in this problem. Because if we do not, there's no one in our place that can do as good of a job, as right of a job, or as noble of a job. So I invite you all to help me and others solve these problems. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry about the technical glitches. I'll edit that all out. You won't even hear it. Questions, throwing things at me. Where did I get everything wrong? Anyone got a mint? Please.
Early on, you said that Google moves things up the list because of links and whatnot. I'm quoting you there. I was looking for a book, and I was very surprised that the library thing entry beat out the WorldCat entry. Do you know whether that's because of links?
Oh, I'm sure it is. I'm sure very much so that is. I mean, I can't go in and see. That's the trick. I can't tell you for real because I don't get to know how they list it, how they rank it, right? Which is a problem. But the most likely answer is exactly that document is well linked and that the library thing site is well linked and connected and ranked up. A lot of people will point to a library thing that may not point to a WorldCat entry. It's the same thing. A lot of people say, I read this great book, and where do they link to? The Amazon entry, right? Well, that means that the Amazon entry will pop up by its nature. Now, the question is, as librarians, particularly as technical service folks, you know that not every field in a MARC record is equal. You know that title probably more important than something way down here, right? We can tweak systems where we can go in and begin to say, well, this is more important, that's more important. And we can do it in a transparent way, whereas folks in Google and Bing world and such can't do it in a transparent way because it becomes proprietary information and it becomes competitive information. But it also turns back to us as the library to say, we have lots of links in our data. We just don't expose them very well. I mean, citations being the most obvious example. We spend how many quarters of millions to millions of dollars to get Web of Science to give us the links to the data we already have, right? I understand that's effort, but we've spent a lot of time with the front matter of books, and I think we need to spend an awful lot more time with the back matter of books because that links data is in there for us to do equivalencies and really cool stuff. We already see what we can do with facets and tweaking the existing metadata. Imagine if we begin use data. Imagine if you combine circulation data with the MARC record. By the way, when I say combine, don't worry, I don't mean actually embed within, relate those data together so that you can begin to put highly popular, highly circulated thing to the top of the list. That's an interesting thing for us to play with. We have lots of use data that we let go by the wayside. If we can anonymize it and use it, we can improve existing systems. But I think the other thing is we need to stop thinking about inventory systems and start thinking about discovery systems. And I think we're trying to build discovery systems out of inventory systems, and it's not always a happy result. Sorry. Yes?
I've actually sort of been thinking about something you just said, which is I feel like if you move most circulated items up to the top of the list, it becomes a self-running one.
This is a great, right, the tyranny of the masses. Mm-hmm. Okay, so now this is now let me information science geek out for a moment. There's this really interesting distribution. You've probably all heard the long tail thing, but the long tail thing is built on you may have heard the 80-20 rule, all this stuff. It's based on a statistical distribution commonly known as a power curve or a Zipf graph, and it looks like this, right? And what it means is that a very few things are highly circulated and a lot of things aren't circulated a lot. Well, when you take that kind of distribution over a collection of any size, which is over 100,000 items or so, it turns out that if you give people 10 results back, you may influence maybe the top 3 positions, maybe the top 2, but very rarely will you manipulate it all. And what's interesting about that question, which I love, is because it's a discovery question. Right? What you're assuming is when people are looking at that result set, they don't know what they want and they're just sort of surfing, right? As opposed to how we design systems now, which is assuming they know what they want and trying to get rid of the irrelevant stuff. That's why the unforgivable sin is allowed to continue where people rank order results based on first in, first on the result list. I swear to God, chronological cataloging is the default sorting option on some of our some of our ILS systems. Stop it. Right? All the work you're doing and we're going to take the date field? Really? That's what we're going to say is the most important. So the answer is, one, wouldn't it be great to find out? But two, a lot of the research shows us that you're not going to overwhelm all the results. Yes, you are going to overwhelm the first 2 or 3 slots. Absolutely. Also, the more they know what they want and the less surfing they do, the less factor that is, because you're not really, if someone says, I really want a book on ancient medieval tapestries and you're going to put Harry Potter at the top, you've got a problem, right? You're not just going to go by that. The other thing is if you look at a lot of use patterns, we look at behavior patterns. In public libraries, one of the number one ways in which people determine what books to check out is what's on the return cart. They never actually hit our systems. They look at, those of you who still go to Blockbuster, it's always you look over the counter and see what came in because those are going to be the hot things you probably really want, right? What happens is that usage data becomes if you want to call it a crutch, you can, but it becomes a way of handling really ambiguous queries. And it turns out when someone has a very ambiguous query, popular is probably not as bad as anything else to try and start them out. So it's a great question, and what I would love to do is get some empirical data where we could try it in library catalogs as opposed to having a rhetorical argument about it. So, yes?
When you started out speaking, you said the depth of the document might be overstated.
Yes.
And then you went on to talk about the danger of functional equivalencies.
Yes.
And then you said the books and ebooks are fundamentally different.
Yes.
You had a picture up there on the screen with the Kindle, the Amazon Kindle and the regular book.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be willing to discuss a little bit your views on where we're going with Kindle, what place Kindle has in the library? For a deep scholar, whether you can ever see them moving totally to a Kindle.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful conversation, right? So let me just throw out a few that the threads that we could, but probably don't want to follow right now. One of the obvious, for example, is DRM, the idea of digital rights management. Right? There's a difference between a physical book and a Kindle book in the fact that I can take the physical book, I got a great book, try it, right? You can't do that with a Kindle book. This is a fundamental difference, and it's a huge challenge to the fundamental concepts that aren't behind a library with first buying and use and fair use. So I want to first of all acknowledge that to me that's actually one of the things that's going to limit Kindle. I don't think it's going to limit libraries. I think people are going to quickly get fed up with it just like they did in music. I mean, if you want to see where DRM and ebooks go, look at where DRM with music is, where suddenly all the music companies and publishing companies said, this is a nightmare for me to figure out. Let's just charge enough to, there are enough honest people that we can charge enough money that we don't have to worry about. So the functional question comes in. So I have a Kindle. I love my Kindle. I actually prefer reading on a Kindle. I've been an ebook geek for a long time, so I'm probably not the most typical user, nor do I pretend to be. But when I look at the Kindle, I look at it as a nascent technology. I look at where it could go. And I look at it and I see things like I can take notes and highlight directly within the Kindle. That if I did it in a library book, they would be very angry with me, right? And in fact, isn't it? I always love the privacy conversations in libraries, and then how many people remember going to the library, looking at the checkout card in the back, and wasn't that a great social network? Ooh, Dave read this. No, thank you. So one, I actually look at how I, as a scholar, use a book as a tool. And there are things in the Kindle that are actually pretty cool, like, for example, annotation, the ability to take notes. I can capture. I can now, if you play with your Kindle, the highlights you have are not only stuck on the Kindle, you go to a website and it will show you what they are, so you can cut and paste and email them to friends and things. So as a functional tool, it's really useful. It can go much further. When we get color, would be nice. When you can actually have a stylus to do this and you can scribble your notes as opposed to typing them. But that will come. The other thing is having 30 books together is useful. But the last one is, and it's going to seem like an itty-bitty little functionality, but it, to me, portends much bigger ones. If I'm reading a book, a Kindle book, and I run across a word I don't know, I move the little cursor over, and up pops a dictionary entry with the word. Now, what that means to me is not, yes, Dave, you need a better vocabulary. But it means that what they've taken is two different reference sources, or two different sources, and combined them seamlessly together. And so the ability that if I know as an author and I'm writing a book, and I can embed hyperlinks within that book, not simply to my own documents, which would be cool, but I can hyperlink them to other documents. And I can imagine reading through a book and going, as cited in Taylor's 68 piece on question negotiation. That sounds like it. Click. You don't have Taylor's. Would you like it? Yes. Boom. Here it is. Having that ability to instantly surf through the actual use of the document changes things immensely. Does it, by the way, negate the inventory requirement, the document? I mean, right now I'm talking about document-like objects. I understand. So it's still, those things would be helped with good metadata and good linking. But then the question becomes, I'm reading this book, I read this point, I followed it, and I read Taylor, and I still don't get it. Jane, what do you think this means? And having the ability to link people now into that reading conversation in a ubiquitous network world. Because that's the other part of the Kindle, is that behind it is a persistent connection to a network. And so having to be able to bring people around it so that we can literally confer on a reading simultaneously at the point of need, I think it gets really, really interesting. And then being able to document that process and make it available to others. So now the next person who comes across that citation to Taylor goes, gee, I don't get it. Oh, look, Dave and Jane were talking about it. What did they come up with? And now it's making that reading process a scholarly conversation process. And the question becomes, that process to me as a scholar is a vital and important and one that I fundamentally use. How can the library and librarians and technical services support that function and expose the knowledge generated in that function to others? So I don't know if I went too off the side, but, and that's not a document-like thing. It's, you know, at that point now I'm in the middle of a conversation and relationships. I'm not in the middle of a document. Other questions or comments? I thought you were going to call me on the fact that I never actually got back to the death of the document. Fair enough. No. And you know, that's why it's probably an overstatement. I think that we are going to have document-like things, and we're going to have versioning. But my question is all the stuff that doesn't fit in that we can't Ferberize. I mean, the concept that Ferber is going to solve our problem when the vast majority of the universe doesn't need that problem solved. I mean, when I'm looking for a movie of Sir Laurence Olivier, how many times do I really ask, do you have the script of it? I mean, how many times do I look at that and say, well, what else do you have by Sir Laurence Olivier? And, gee, can I rent it and can I look at it? Is it checked out? And who else looked at it? That's not a Ferber problem. That's a connections problem. That's a social problem. So I appreciate your time. I'm sorry for drawing on so long. And sorry for the technical problems, but thank you very much.